Thanks everyone for being here today. I actually re-listened to the discussion Joe and I had back earlier this year on the podcast, and that so to prep us so we could build on that discussion. So hopefully some of you have listened to that, but if not, don't worry. We're gonna dive into some of those similar topics, and I wanted to kind of go a little deeper on some things that I mentioned there and then really open it up to your comments and questions as well, because I feel like that's the most important part of us having this opportunity to be here live rather than just, on a podcast as well. So I have a few slides to anchor us through this journey, and I look forward to having other follow-up and conversation as well. So let me share my screen here and make sure that here we go. So, really, all this is about how we can create a culture of continuous learning. And I'm going to share with you a word catalyst that I actually was inspired by in talking with Tilo Schwartz many years ago when we were working on a potential kata practitioners day before the pandemic happened. And how that's really, I think it's about how we can all really accelerate creating cultures of continuous learning. So stay tuned, and we're going to dive into that as well. Joe already did a really great introduction of who I am. I work with organizations around the world to really help them and their leaders and continuous improvement, agile, lean practitioners like yourselves to create these cultures of continuous learning by leveraging the tools and the behaviors and practices. So the tools are only as good as the behaviors, practice, and thinking patterns that we have behind there. As Joe mentioned, I had this opportunity to, well, I'll go, actually, my opportunity to partner with Mr. Yoshino became because of a serendipitous opportunity to move to Japan almost 10 years ago with my family. I was already a lean and continuous improvement practitioner in healthcare, and I had started my own consulting practice just shortly before that. And moving to Japan for my husband's job was this incredible, just like opportunity. And I met Mr. Yoshino, and he said, "Come and spend the day with me, and we'll start." And we just hit it off. And that was the beginning of not just a beautiful friendship, but enriched learning for myself that I then started to share with others through my blog posts. And then it became the book. I felt like his rich learning over 4 decades, 40 years at Toyota really had to be captured, because we're all so curious on what's the secret. What is really the thing that is making Toyota, which is the foundation of lean, the foundation of agile, so successful? And so that was where I kept starting to talk with him. What is the secret? And he said, the only secret to Toyota is its attitude towards learning. And this took a while to pull out of him, because he said, there isn't a secret. There isn't a secret. But it's this attitude towards learning that was often missed in the early, research findings of looking at what was going on at Toyota and other Japanese manufacturers to make them so successful. And it's actually what Mike Rother did very successfully in observing the patterns of behavior, which is the secret, the patterns of behavior and this attitude and practices towards learning that has become known as Toyota Kata. And as I shared with Joe and you on the podcast, there isn't at Toyota, and certainly during Mr. Yoshino's time, anything that's called Toyota Kata. Kata are just routines and practices that define a pattern of behavior, and it's used often in martial arts. But it's become ubiquitous since Mike Rother wrote his book, Toyota Kata, with those patterns and behaviors that he observed about the scientific thinking mindset and practices and the coaching for scientific thinking at Toyota, which is this attitude towards learning. So, as Joe talked about in the book, I talk about all these inherent practices and behaviors that fit so well with what Mike described and articulated as the kata, the behaviors and practices for scientific thinking. And really, scientific thinking is just based on the scientific method, or PDCA, plan, do, check, act, or PDSA, plan, do, study, adjust, whichever you call it. But I actually like to call it SAPD, because we get stuck in this plan, do cycle, and we never do the study and adjust very well here in the West, in the US, in Europe, in South America, and all these countries that I work with. We are so focused on the doing rather than the learning process. And so what's really powerful in my mindset about the practices, the kata, is that it helps us have the framework for remembering the reflection, the study, the adjustments, and framing things as experiments. So we need to understand, what are the actual conditions? What are the results that we're getting? What are the capabilities we have? What are these adjustments? And this is what the framework is about: making small adjustments, identifying countermeasures, tests of change, generating hypotheses, and then creating our micro plan about what we're going to test, implementing it, and again, coming back and studying. And as Mike and others always say, the learning is the difference between what we expect to happen and what actually happens. And so this is the kata of scientific thinking that we can apply no matter what tools and frameworks we're using for problem solving. And this is the pattern of behavior that was inherent in what Mr. Yoshino learned from his bosses and his colleagues at Toyota when he joined in the late 1960s, and that he then later passed on to those who worked with him through his career. So I want to share some of this because these are, even though the word kata isn't used, this is the same pattern and framework that underlies all the success for having a learning culture. And it was 10 years ago this summer that I met Mr. Yoshino for the first time. Actually, this is with John Shook, who was the first non-Japanese employee of Toyota Motor Corporation, who worked directly for Mr. Yoshino in the 1980s. And they were speaking at the Lean Coaching Summit in California, which is where I'm based. And I was there as a speaker as well. And I was sitting furiously scribbling with, oh my gosh, these two amazing people talking about like really what it means to be a manager and a learner at Toyota. And listen to this because it really fits very well with the Toyota Kata framework of problem solving and coaching for problem solving. Mr. Yoshino said, "My aim as a manager was to develop John, or really could be whomever was reporting him, by giving him a mission or target and supporting him while he figured out how to reach the target. And as I was developing John, I was aware I was developing myself as well." And so this is sort of speaks to like he was always having to learn about how is he coaching more effectively and how is then he helping John learn how to be a problem solver as well. And this is the pattern that underlies A3 thinking as well. John wrote one of the best books on A3 thinking called Managing to Learn, and he acknowledges Mr. Yoshino as one of the models for the manager character in that book. And so I had this aha moment then, and as I started to spend more time with Mr. Yoshino, and he was talking about how he was learning to be a thinker and a learner, and then how to be a manager and coach others as well. And it kept coming back to these three simple points, and these really align very well with the Kata framework. A leader's purpose is threefold. First, to set the direction, and I'm going to go into this and make the links to the Kata framework. Second is to provide support. And third is to develop yourself. And I call this leading to learn. So again, about this mindset of learning, a culture of learning, and the kata are the routines and practices of behaviors that really support this part of a leader's purpose. It's how you embody this purpose. So the first, okay, so let's link this to the kata, is about setting the direction. And that's about providing direction, setting the challenge or a clear target. And something I think is really important here to highlight is that it should be based on what is needed. What is the challenge we need to achieve, for not just what we think we can achieve? And so this is about, Mr. Yoshino talks about stretching our mindset. We don't want to be setting goals and challenges. They're not really challenges, actually, if we know we can already get there or we already know the answer. It's about actually creating that gap that makes us a little uncomfortable. And I love this phrase that he uses sometimes: seemingly impossible. You need to set a seemingly impossible challenge or a seemingly impossible target. But what's important, it's not actually impossible, but you're like, oh my God, how are we going to do this? I don't know. And that's where that attitude towards learning and the experimentation is so important. And so here is this connection. So I pulled this from, the Toyota Kata book and what Mike Rother created. And this is that same look, set the direction, provide support, and develop yourself. So this is where you need this challenge out here, the direction or challenge. These are the same words that that Mike used. And then we don't know how to get there. This is the seemingly impossible challenge, the seemingly impossible target. But then what we need to do is that still out of reach, but a little bit more possible, but we still don't know how to get there. And then as a coach or leader, you want to help someone move through this threshold of knowledge on how to get there. And that's where we get to then this second component about how do we provide support. But what's really important I want to highlight too is, We may not know exactly a specific destination of that end challenge, but the target, this next target condition, and Mike does a great job of describing this in all of the Toyota Kata work, is that needs to be clearly defined. We need to have a simple equation of what's that target, that next clear step, then understand what's actually happening, the current condition, and then we can define that problem or the gap. And this is how we then can experiment our way. And this is where the kata, the shorter form of the kata, that daily micro experiments moving forward fit in here. So we may not be knowing exactly how to get or with specificity what the direction or the actual challenge is. It's more like the journey of on the map, the where we need to go to. But that next target condition needs to be defined, and then we learn our way forward to that, and then make the next target condition. So this is then how the improvement kata is around how do we, and the coaching kata, how we provide that support. And this is about leaders and coaches. If you're in a role called coach or an agile practitioner or lean, coach in your organization, or a manager or leader, your job is not only to create, create that clarity of where we need to go, but to create the conditions for learning. And this is about having the tension between providing that challenge, but also providing enough support. And so we need to get that challenge where someone doesn't know the answer next, but you're giving enough support that they feel like they are learning their way forward. So if we have challenge with no support in our organizations, people are going to feel terrible and probably leave your organization. If you don't have the capability, they're going to get too frustrated. But if you have this organization where it's just everyone's providing the support and we feel good, but we don't have direction of aligning our actions, we're actually then not doing anything truly productive. So this is the tension of how we create the learning zone. And it's finding that just right amount of balance that we're not pushing nor pulling. And this is where the framework of the kata practices can really be helpful in breaking that down and making sure that you're helping people learn their way forward through that threshold of knowledge, because it's messy. There's struggle. We don't know. And then also we need to develop ourselves, like, because this isn't easy. We're used to being the problem solvers, the one with the answer or the expert that comes in and saves the day. And it's uncomfortable to let people have some challenge and some struggle in there, but that's inherent in learning. You have to find that right amount of struggle. And so we all have to see ourselves as business conditions that also require improvement. And this is what's nice about the coaching kata is we need help to learn how to be coaches, about how to not just be focusing on the problem solving itself. So we need coaching and support at all of those levels. So this also is built out, and I use this all the time, that we have different levels of coaching for improvement. And this is the same framework as the coaching kata and the improvement kata. We have a problem owner or a learner, and they're working on it with probably with team members, or they could be working as an independent contributor. There's the first coach who helps the problem owner develop his or her problem solving thinking skills and like actually working on a tangible problem. That's where the improvement kata can be really helpful, or questions like that around the actual problem the person's trying to solve. And then the coaching kata can help people develop their coaching skills. And I'd use this with A3 thinking. I use this just generally about how are we developing not just problem solving skills, but coaching for problem solving skills. So that person's really focusing on how is the first coach getting better on that social dimension of coaching. So we need to all become not just catalysts, but catalysts for change. So I love this. So a catalyst is an event or person that accelerates the rate of change. But if we put that into the same framework of we're wanting to create this learning culture that gets results through developing people with a scientific mindset, we can think of a catalyst or a catalyst as an event or person that accelerates the rate of scientific thinking and improvement in an organization, or someone or something who encourages learning as the source for progress and change. So we all can be catalysts or catalysts and actually go through this whole framework about how the different 8 skills that you can have to become a more effective catalyst in my recent Chain of Learning podcast episode. I believe it is 9. And I also have a change catalyst self assessment that you can get to. So listen into the podcast episode and also take advantage of downloading this. It's free and available on my website about other competencies that you might not be aware of. If you're trying to lead change in your organization, what are some of the other skills and competencies beyond coaching and being a skillful facilitator that you need to have too? In addition, and how do frameworks and practices like Kata help support you with that as well. So as we leave here today, I want you to put into the chat some things about what are you going to do to become a more effective catalyst for learning in your organization. And, Joe and I talk about the fall down 7 times, get up 8. This is these Daruma dolls behind me, and they actually are like Weeble Wobbles. They represent the proverb, fall down 7 times, get up 8. And I love that because there's struggle and setbacks and, failures. We're going to fall down. We're not going to have the right answer, but it's about continuing to get yourself back up and moving forward and learning your way forward until eventually you get to the answer. And it may be a different answer than you thought in the beginning, but that's the point of the scientific mindset and experimenting our way forward. So I'm looking forward to hearing what Joe has to say and then diving into your questions. Also, I encourage you to listen to my podcast too, which I just started in the fall. And today's episode that just dropped actually talks about how you can break the telling habit, which is one of the really important skills in being an effective kata practitioner. We have to get out of us jumping in with giving all the answers or telling people what we think they should do next and giving them the space to figure that out. So, looking forward to hearing your feedback on all of that, and I will stop my share and move on to Joe, and I look forward to the questions and more.
So here we go. Katie, that was a lot of energy. Thank you.
I also wanted to I really find that let's start with the framing and then let's go into the questions because that is so much more engaging. So, looking forward to those
Exactly.
questions.
So I'm going to keep it short and sweet myself as well. I want to connect and with you guys from an Agile's perspective, what Katie just said, a little bit more deeper. Everyone here on the call who might have an Agile background, might have already built some bridges between the content that Katie just shared. And obviously, for example, like the challenges and things we're going through from a leader, but also Agile coach or maybe a team member and so forth. So there's a lot of sometimes struggles or hurdles we have to take. And Kata can help you with that to tackle some of those things. So let me just go a little bit a story here about American Forces Network, the slide you see here right now. I thought about just sharing a personal story here with you guys about culture. And it was one of the things that popped up in Katie's book. And Isao actually shared a story in her book about how he learned English as a second language and how before he came to the United States. And when I saw this chapter, which was one of the earlier parts of the book, when I saw that, I was like, obviously very drawn to this as I myself learned English as a second language back in Germany. In my childhood years, you go to school and you probably have had language courses yourself where you feel like I'm learning Spanish or whatever language, and you're learning this from books. When you learn that, and that's what I felt at that time, English in this case, I felt, I learned the language, but I didn't really learn the culture. I didn't really learn anything about what was going on within the country. I was intrigued by learning the language to possibly connect on a different level. And for me, just like Isao, who in Japan listened to American, I believe it was military radio stations, I had the same opportunity with AFN. So I'm always thankful for, in this case, the American taxpayer, which I am now too, right, to promote this radio station overseas. Why? Because that was real, right? You learned the English language, but you also connected it to the culture of the United States. That really resonated very well with me. So just learning about a process or a framework, in this case, to connect this to Agile does not necessarily provide the culture that you would like to live with within your organization. So there's another level of doing that. And so when I reflect on that from an Agile transformations perspective, there are a couple of things that really stand out to me as some things that are going majorly wrong within many organizations. And one of them is really that Agile transformations still today, and I'm talking a lot about that, are being seen as almost like a project within organizations where you have a starting point, an end point of an Agile transformation, and you see that as a project. When is this Agile transformation being done? So you have a clear timeline, and maybe somebody in your organization would like to have a checkbox to say the Agile transformation is over. So that is one major pitfall within organizations to see when is this transformation over. Well, we could call it over, but that would also mean that we're stopping with the improvement. And that is obviously not in our interest either. There's also other pitfalls in that. And another pitfall is, another major one, in my opinion, is that by looking at a timeline like this, is that we are actually believing that this is one of the learnings here, that by the end of an agile transformation, the organization will be agile, whereas the transformation itself needs to show characteristics of agility itself. We don't want to start an agile transformation for 2 years and then expect that we are in 2 years agile. We would expect that we are actually already becoming agile in much shorter cycles while we're going through the agile transformation. So with these two things in mind, and there was a question from Julia in the chat, what was your motivation to start with the Agile Kata? And that was one of those where it's like there's something going really significantly wrong with agile transformation. Now, the topic of agile transformation might not be as cool anymore as it was maybe a few years ago, but we're talking about business agility and we see similar patterns with that topic as well. So I wanted to tackle some of those issues that were related to this part. Now, don't want to read them out to you, just going to pick some of those things. But things we notice with agile transformation and really connecting this with culture is that team agility, what we often see in teams is like robotic team behavior, like around, we hear sprint fatigue, right? I saw recently a meetup meeting where somebody actually said we have a clinic, right? Or therapy sessions and so on. And so there's a lot of things that are going on within the agile space where people are searching for help and to tackle some of those things. Lack of trust, right? We feel like we're an agile island. We're like, we're doing agile, but the rest of the organization isn't agile. Sometimes teams report back and say, we have no ownership over the process. We're being told what to do. We have no options where we should be doing Scrum, etc. On an agile transformation side, I mean, if you're going more on the organizational side, we're seeing like conformity to processes and frameworks that somebody announces within an organization. We're all doing Scrum. We're all doing this, right? So just to give an example, Scrum just stands for one specific thing. It could be anything. We're rolling out Scrum within an organization. Sometimes we hear waves of services. We're going to train everybody and then we coach everybody. We also see copying cultures. That's I want to spend a second on. If somebody says, we want to use the Spotify model. And that was one of those links I also made to Katie's book, is that the culture has to organically grow. In this particular case, it was with Toyota itself. And Isao obviously has a very personal story around this. But every company needs to find its own path, right? What was striking to me in 2009, when Mike Rother released the Toyota Kata book, what was very interesting was there was a story with Toyota where somebody says, we're inviting people to join us at Toyota to come in as visitors and experience the floor of manufacturing, right? It's like, why would anybody invite outsiders into their manufacturing halls and show them how they produce cars, right? And people were like just stunned. Why would they do such a thing? And we do something very similar. We say like Spotify model. And we look at this model and say like, why would they give away of how they work? Well, the interesting thing is Toyota and Spotify just on very two different levels. They're not showing you how they work. They're just showing you right now a model, a representation of what they're currently doing. Until you adopt that model, they're already somewhere else. So they have continued their learning journey into somewhere else. So copying these cultures is probably not possible, right? Not even on these diagrams. And I myself have experienced that these models, like in this particular case, the Spotify model, is not even something that is being used at Spotify itself. So that is interesting thing. So big bang agile transformation. So with that in mind, there's a lot of learning and things we can do on a smaller scale. And I found that with Kata, Agile Kata in particular, I describe that as a universal pattern for continuous improvement of agility. So we're taking what Katie just said before in terms of learning and Kata and improvement, coaching Kata, which is bundling these things together. We're calling this Agile Kata with the purpose. The purpose of ours is we are shaping the direction of an organization or a team with agility in mind, right? So you could use the improvement Kata by Mike Rother and Katie mentioned for anything, possibly anything, right? You can learn a sport, you can learn a language. The Agile Kata is very specific to increasing agility within our organization. And I'm going to come back to that timeline you saw before one more time in a second, but that is an important piece of information I want to share. So a different visual representation here, what Katie said, I'm just going to just reiterate those steps quick because it's a stepping stone to our conversation here is big, audacious goals for teams and organization. Possible, right? So we don't want to have a goal or a challenge to say we're going to the moon next month, right? That would be an impossible, I would think, impossible kind of activity for us to do. The direction would be too big. It would be too big of a goal. So it has to be something that is possible, right? But still a challenge. And often we see that in transformations is like these are more like planned, executed kind of things, but not really challenges for an organization. So it should motivate a team, a group of people within your organization to say, we're going to go after that. Obviously, with the side effect that a team also needs to feel safe to fail, possibly, right? That could also be something that we're not achieving the challenge, but at least we're going into this direction. Before we do that, we need to grasp the current condition. And that's a term right from Michael Author's improvement kata, right? The current condition. How many coaches are just moving forward and say, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this, without taking stock and say, where are we right now? What is the current condition before we even try to attempt? And obviously, this gap could be huge between one and two in this case. So we said break it down into smaller steps, in this case, target conditions in step three. And when we're doing that, it's digestible. These are very short kind of steps. Now, that step is not a sprint. So if you're dialing in here and you're coming from a Scrum background, these are not sprints. These are not rhythmic necessarily. We want to get to step three as quick as possible in good quality as we can. And when we have achieved that, we have a new target condition. Now, to do that, we need a form of experimentations, and those are the PDCA cycles. And that's why you see around the label four, you see this rotation going on. That's what Katie mentioned before as a PDCA cycle. So we're doing constant experimentation. Some experimentations fail, some experiments will pass. And once we get to step three, we're going to go back and say, let's plan our next target condition. And that will, over time, result into a path towards our direction. That's the intention of the Agile Kata. Now, the interesting thing here is in those four steps is like very easy to explain, hard to do. Why? Because this is just the beginning. So very different to Scrum. Scrum is a framework that is being introduced. So these are the rules. This is the stuff we're going to do. These are the artifacts. Kata is just the starting point. So you're going to start. These are routines to help you get started with scientific thinking. But once you know, you will leave the pattern over time. You create something of your own as a result of that. And these are obviously continuous kind of efforts. Now, let's bring this back to Agile because we're surrounding these four steps with activities that are very typical for us in an Agile way. So remember the Agile transformation timeline from before, where we said there's no start and end. This is an ongoing kind of thing. And we want to live the culture while we're going through this. I found the Agile Kata super suitable here for this because you see visuals that should connect you with liberating structures, open space, agile coaching formats, leadership that is really servant leadership, agile leadership. We would see we want to measure value and outcome while we're going through the steps of the Agile Kata. And only that we're living the culture of agility rather than having an end result. So it's in continuous kind of effort for us when we are adopting the Agile Kata. So the Agile Kata is an extension to what Mike Roffer calls the Toyota Kata. So it's a lot of kata terms here, but our intent is really to improve agility on all possible levels within an organization. Now, what I'm talking about is bringing back our timeline from before. The Agile Manifesto was published in 2001. There was a good chunk of 10 years of team leadership in terms of how do we bring agility into a team. 2014, 15, we heard more and more organizations going for a agile transformation. And what I think a lot of organizations could be benefiting from is in 2024, obviously also the years before, is really continuous improvement. I think that is going to, my new era is for me to share the Agile Kata with you, with everybody else who is interested as a tool to push the boundaries within organizations, in this particular case, agility. So using frameworks, existing frameworks as a starting point. So breaking through the Scrum fatigue and just dealing with the framework and robotic behavior. We want to use business goals to drive agility, not necessarily just transforming for the sake of transforming. So what is it you're trying to achieve from a business perspective? And then the Agile Kata can drive you there in agile ways. The agile transformation becomes a byproduct. We want to see more innovation coming out by experimentation. It's very rooted in the Agile Manifesto already to do experimentation. We want to highlight that, obviously. And we want to have these routines and habit changes we do with the Agile Kata. And that's really the scientific thinking to do something we have done before in this way and transforming that into something we're now doing in a different way. And that is really what these habit changes are. And everybody has habits, and some habits are good and some habits are bad. And those bad ones we want to change. Now, we could say culture is really the collective behavior of people within an organization. So if we are changing people's behaviors step by step, piece by piece, person by person, then we will over time change the culture within an organization. So that is not necessarily a quick kind of activity, but the Agile Kata is a routine to make that happen for you within your organization. So these are just a few things you can do with the Agile Kata. It's like, how does this fit? I only talked a little bit about Agile transformation. It also helps you to increase business agility. You can use it for product development. There are teams that are now using it instead of Scrum or Kanban. They're using those 4 steps now to develop products, actually hands-on software engineering teams. And it can be used even as an organizational change management tool to, obviously in this case, to drive agility forward. If you are using the Agile Kata, you will see certain things like continuous improvement. That's the mindset. Language, in from leadership to team member, anywhere in between, maybe even customers are using like target conditions or current conditions or the direction. These will become part of your vocabulary, which is a great thing. You see an emphasis on coaching, right? I always find that fascinating that in sports, coaching is a common thing, whereas in the business world, organizations feel weird about why would I need a coach, but in professional sports, it's a common thing. Sometimes even more than one coach. We make small and large changes at the same time with Kata, and we believe in empiricism as we already do in the Agile community. So this is really building some bridges between the Kata community as well as the Agile community, and really, and when we say Agile, I mean lean Agile, and doing something great with the thinking Mike Rother has prepared for us.